A cowboy found 5 Apache women in his barn. Their request changed everything. Jack Reynolds had spent his entire life on the wide, dusty plains of Arizona. The sun rose and set over endless fields of sagebrush and cacti, and Jack had grown used to the rhythm of the land. He was a cowboy through and through, the kind of man who woke up before dawn, saddled his horse, and rode across the open prairie with a sense of purpose and quiet determination. His days were long, and they were often lonely, but Jack had learned to appreciate the solitude. The land had a way of teaching patience, resilience, and a deep respect for the world around him. That particular evening, the sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, the kind that made the horizon seem to stretch forever. Jack had just finished feeding the cattle and repairing a section of the fence that had been damaged by the windstorm a few days earlier. His horse, a strong and loyal animal named Dusty, nuzzled his shoulder as if congratulating him on a job well done. Jack laughed softly and patted Dusty's mane. Life on the ranch was simple, predictable, and in many ways comforting. But as he walked toward the barn to finish his evening chores, he noticed something unusual, a faint shadow moving near the hayloft. At first, Jack thought it might be a stray animal. The desert was full of raccoons, foxes, and other creatures that often sought shelter in barns. But the movement was too deliberate, too careful to be an animal. Jack slowed his pace and approached the barn quietly, his hand instinctively reaching for the old revolver he kept at his side. He had learned over the years that caution was a cowboy's best friend. As he drew closer, he saw them, 5 women, huddled together in the corner of the barn. Their eyes widened in fear as they realized they had been discovered. Jack froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had encountered many challenges on the frontier: rattlesnakes, storms, and even occasional disputes with neighbors, but he had never found strangers hiding in his barn. The women were unlike anyone he had met. Their clothing was simple but distinct, adorned with patterns and colors that reflected a culture Jack did not fully understand. Their hair was long and dark, and their expressions were tense, as if they had been running for a long time. For a moment, neither Jack nor the women spoke. The silence stretched, filled only by the creaking of the barn's wooden beams and the soft rustle of the wind outside. Jack studied them carefully, noting the cautious way they held themselves. He could see fear in their eyes, but there was also something else: strength. Even in their exhaustion, they carried themselves with dignity. It was clear that these women had endured hardships and were no strangers to adversity. Jack took a slow step forward, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said gently. "I won't hurt you." His voice was calm, steady, the kind that comes from years of handling unpredictable situations. The women looked at each other, exchanging quick glances before one of them, a woman with piercing brown eyes, stepped slightly forward. She spoke a few words in a language Jack did not understand. Her tone was urgent but not threatening. Jack shook his head. "I'm sorry. I don't understand. Can you speak slowly, or in another way?" He gestured to the barn, inviting them to sit down. The women hesitated, unsure if they could trust him, but the exhaustion on their faces was evident. Finally, they cautiously accepted his offer, sitting on the hay bales as Jack retrieved some water from a barrel and poured it into a few cups. He handed them the water carefully, making sure his movements were slow and non-threatening. The women drank thirstily, their hands shaking slightly as they held the cups. Jack watched them, feeling a mixture of curiosity and concern. He realized that they must have come from far away, fleeing something dangerous. The frontier was a harsh place, and he had heard stories of conflicts between settlers, native tribes, and other groups struggling to survive. But he also knew that offering help could be risky. Hiding strangers, especially in a place like this, could bring trouble. Yet he could not turn them away. Something about their situation tugged at his conscience. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the barn, Jack decided to speak again. "You're safe here for now," he said. "If you need help, I'll do what I can. But I need to understand your situation." The women exchanged more glances, and one of them reached into her bag, pulling out a small, worn notebook filled with sketches and notes. It was clear they had traveled a long distance, documenting their journey or perhaps keeping records of important events. Through gestures, broken Spanish, and a few words of English, Jack began to piece together their story. They were Apache women, fleeing from violence and unrest in their homeland. They had been forced to leave their villages, traveling for days through harsh terrain, always wary of being discovered. Jack listened intently, realizing that these women had survived incredible hardships. Their bravery was evident, even in their fear. Over the next few hours, Jack offered them more food and blankets, trying to make them feel as comfortable as possible. He shared stories of his own life on the ranch, speaking of cattle drives, storms he had weathered, and the quiet beauty of the desert nights. Slowly, the women began to relax, their tense expressions softening as they realized that Jack was not a threat. Trust, Jack knew, was built slowly, and he was determined to earn it. As night fell, Jack lit a small lantern in the barn, casting a warm glow over the faces of the women. He could see the weariness in their eyes, the kind of exhaustion that comes from both physical strain and emotional stress. He understood that they needed rest, safety, and a sense of hope. For the first time in days, the women seemed to let their guard down, allowing themselves to breathe and relax in the presence of someone who offered kindness without judgment. Jack stayed nearby, keeping watch throughout the night. The sounds of the desert were alive around him. The distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through the sagebrush, and the soft movements of the women as they shifted on the hay. He thought about the journey they had endured, the dangers they had faced, and the courage it must have taken to continue moving forward despite fear. He also thought about the responsibility he now carried. These women were relying on him, trusting him in a way that could change the course of their lives. By the time the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, painting the desert in hues of gold and pink, Jack felt a quiet sense of determination. He had made a choice, one that would not be easy, but it felt right. He would help these women, guide them, and protect them as best he could. He knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but he also knew that their presence in his barn was not a coincidence. Something larger was at play, a story that was just beginning to unfold. As the sun rose fully, Jack stepped outside, breathing in the crisp morning air. He looked back at the barn where the women were now awake, quietly preparing for the day. There was a sense of cautious hope in the air, a feeling that despite the hardships and dangers that lay ahead, they had found a temporary sanctuary. Jack knew that this moment, small as it seemed, marked the beginning of a journey that would change all of their lives forever. The day ahead would be filled with questions, planning, and careful decisions. But for now, in the stillness of the morning, Jack felt a connection to these women, a bond formed through shared humanity, respect, and the unspoken understanding that sometimes strangers appear in our lives to challenge us, teach us, and change us in ways we never expected. And so, in the quiet barn on the edge of the Arizona plains, the story began, a story of courage, trust, and the unexpected ways that lives can intersect, forever altering the paths of those involved. Jack Reynolds did not yet know how the journey would unfold, but one thing was certain. The discovery of the 5 Apache women in his barn was the start of something remarkable, a chapter in his life that would test his heart, his courage, and his sense of justice. The morning sun spilled over the rolling plains, casting long shadows across Jack Reynolds' ranch. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dust, and the world seemed calm, almost deceptively peaceful. Inside the barn, the 5 Apache women stirred from their sleep on the hay bales, stretching tired arms and blinking away the remnants of a restless night. Their eyes still held traces of fear, but there was also a flicker of curiosity, a quiet hope that the man who had discovered them might truly be different from the threats they had faced on their journey. Jack moved quietly, careful not to startle them. He brought out more water and bread, setting it gently on the wooden floor. "Eat," he said softly. "You need strength for the day." The women hesitated, glancing at each other, then cautiously took the bread and water. They ate slowly, their movements deliberate, as if wary that something could go wrong at any moment. Jack watched them with a sense of awe. They had traveled far, faced dangers unknown, and yet here they were, showing patience and composure despite everything. Once they had eaten, Jack sat on a low stool, thinking about how to communicate with them better. He had already realized that words alone would not suffice. Gestures, drawings, and patience were all he had, and even that required time and care. He pulled out a small notebook and pencil from his coat and began to sketch simple images: a sun for day, a house for shelter, a horse for travel. The women watched with interest, their expressions softening as understanding slowly crossed their faces. One of the women, the one with the sharp brown eyes, began to draw as well, using simple lines to depict mountains, rivers, and small huts. Through these sketches, a story began to emerge, a story of a journey, of fear, and of survival. Jack realized that their request was more than just a plea for temporary shelter. They needed guidance and protection, perhaps even beyond the borders of his ranch. They were seeking a safe path to a distant settlement where they could live without the constant threat of danger. The thought of helping them filled Jack with both determination and anxiety. The frontier was unforgiving, and harboring strangers could put him in serious trouble. Lawmen might question him, neighbors might misunderstand, and danger could follow them even beyond the ranch. Yet despite these risks, Jack felt a deep responsibility. These women were counting on him, and he could not turn away. Over the next few hours, Jack and the women began to communicate more clearly. They shared gestures, sketches, and broken words, slowly forming a rudimentary understanding. Jack learned that the women had fled their homes after a violent conflict had erupted in the nearby territories. Villages had been attacked, families separated, and the land had become unsafe for them to remain. They spoke of nights spent hiding in the desert, of traveling long distances under the cover of darkness, and of avoiding patrols that might have forced them back or worse. Each story Jack understood, piece by piece, filled him with admiration for their courage. He also realized that they were asking for more than just a place to stay. They were asking him to trust them as well. And Jack knew that trust would be tested, not just by the dangers outside, but by the challenges that came with helping strangers in a world where survival often meant looking out for oneself. He had to think carefully, plan, and act wisely. Over breakfast, Jack decided to teach the women a few simple safety rules. He showed them how to move quietly through the barn, how to avoid making noise that might attract attention, and how to prepare basic supplies for a journey. The women listened attentively, absorbing every detail with remarkable focus. As the morning turned into afternoon, Jack took Dusty, his faithful horse, and led the women outside for a short walk around the ranch. The women had never seen such open land, at least not in months, and they paused frequently, pointing at distant hills, trees, and the horizon. Jack explained landmarks, routes, and safe places to hide, using a combination of words, gestures, and sketches. They began to trust him more with each step, their initial fear giving way to cautious hope. Jack noticed how they communicated silently among themselves, nodding and pointing, confirming plans or sharing information. It was clear that they were organized, strategic, and resilient, qualities that had helped them survive their long journey. By late afternoon, Jack realized that it was time to discuss the possibility of leaving the ranch safely. He drew a rough map on a piece of parchment, marking trails, water sources, and areas to avoid. The women leaned over the map, pointing and nodding, their fingers tracing the safest path toward the settlement they aimed to reach. Jack felt a surge of respect for their determination. They were not helpless. They were survivors, and they had endured more than most people could imagine. Their request for help was not one of weakness. It was one of calculated necessity, and Jack understood the gravity of it. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the land, Jack and the women returned to the barn. They sat on the hay bales again, quiet now, reflecting on the day. Jack offered more food, and they accepted with gratitude. He noticed small smiles forming, brief moments of relief amid the tension that still lingered. He realized that these moments of connection, trust, and shared understanding were just as important as the plans themselves. The women needed to feel safe, not just physically, but emotionally. They needed to know that someone believed in them and would stand by them in the days ahead. That evening, Jack lit a small lantern in the barn, casting a soft glow over the women's faces. He could see exhaustion in their eyes, but there was also resolve. He understood that they were ready to trust him, but they were also cautious, aware of the dangers that might follow them. Jack felt a mixture of pride and responsibility. He had made a choice, and it was one that would require courage, patience, and careful planning. The journey ahead would not be easy, but he believed that together, they could face whatever challenges came their way. Throughout the night, Jack stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the desert and watching over the women. He thought about the risks involved, the lawmen who might question him, and the neighbors who might not understand. Yet he also thought about the importance of doing what was right, even when it was difficult. These women had trusted him with their lives, and he could not betray that trust. He made a promise to himself that he would guide them, protect them, and help them find safety, no matter the obstacles. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Jack felt a quiet determination settle within him. The women were still asleep, but their trust was slowly growing. They had accepted his help, even though it was dangerous, and he had committed himself to their safety. The day ahead would involve careful planning, gathering supplies, and preparing for the journey. Jack knew that the frontier could be unforgiving, but he also knew that courage, trust, and resilience could overcome even the greatest challenges. Jack quietly observed the women, thinking about the lives they had left behind, the hardships they had endured, and the strength they had shown. He realized that this was more than just an unexpected encounter. It was a test of character, a chance to make a difference in the lives of those who needed him most. The women were not merely strangers. They were individuals who had survived incredible odds, and now their journey was intertwined with his. He felt a deep sense of responsibility, knowing that the choices he made in the coming days would shape their future. By mid-morning, Jack began to prepare the ranch for the challenges ahead. He gathered supplies, dried food, water, blankets, and basic tools that the women could carry on their journey. He also checked his horses, ensuring they were strong and ready for travel. The women watched, assisting where they could, learning the layout of the ranch and familiarizing themselves with the routines they would need to follow to stay safe. Each small task was a lesson in trust and cooperation, strengthening the bond between Jack and the women. As the sun reached its peak, Jack reflected on the significance of their presence in his life. He realized that this encounter had changed him in ways he could not yet fully understand. The women had come seeking refuge, but in doing so, they had challenged him to act with courage, empathy, and foresight. They had asked for his help, not just to survive, but to navigate a world that was often cruel and unforgiving. And Jack knew that accepting this responsibility was not just an act of kindness, it was a moral imperative. By evening, Jack had planned the next steps. He would help the women travel safely to the nearest settlement, avoiding areas of danger and using hidden trails known only to him. The journey would be difficult, but Jack was confident that with careful preparation and mutual trust, they could succeed. The women had already demonstrated remarkable courage, and Jack knew that together they could face the challenges ahead. As night fell, the barn was quiet except for the soft sounds of the desert outside. The women slept peacefully for the first time in days, their trust in Jack slowly solidifying. Jack remained awake, thinking about the journey ahead, the dangers they would face, and the lessons they would learn together. He knew that this was only the beginning of a story that would test them all, a story that would change lives, forge bonds, and reveal the strength that lies within those who refuse to give up, no matter the odds. Jack Reynolds woke before dawn, the first light of morning spilling over the desert plains. The world was quiet except for the soft rustle of sagebrush and the distant call of a hawk circling in the sky. He moved quietly through his ranch, careful not to wake the 5 Apache women who were still asleep on the hay bales in the barn. Even after a few days, Jack understood that their trust was fragile, and that patience would be key in guiding them safely. As he worked to gather supplies, Jack thought about the journey ahead. The women would need food, water, and guidance if they were to reach a settlement far to the east. He loaded bags with dried meat, hardtack, blankets, and water skins, carefully distributing the weight to make travel easier. Dusty, his loyal horse, nuzzled the packs as if sensing the importance of the mission. Jack could feel a sense of anticipation in the air, mixed with a quiet tension. He knew the journey would be challenging, but he also knew that with careful planning they could succeed. When the women awoke, Jack greeted them warmly, using gestures and sketches to explain the plan for the day. They listened intently, nodding and pointing to confirm that they understood. The morning passed with preparation and instruction. Jack showed them how to move quietly across open spaces, how to recognize tracks that could indicate danger, and how to ration their supplies. Each lesson was important, not just for survival, but for building confidence. The women were quick learners, absorbing each detail with determination and focus. Once ready, Jack led them out of the barn and toward the outer edges of his property. The desert stretched before them, wide and unforgiving, but also filled with beauty. Rolling hills, clusters of cacti, and distant mesas painted a picture of rugged tranquility. The women paused often, pointing to landmarks, sketching symbols in the dirt, and asking questions through gestures. Jack answered patiently, using the notebook to draw maps and trails. It was a slow, careful process, but each step brought them closer together, forging a bond of trust that grew stronger with every passing moment. As they moved farther from the ranch, Jack became acutely aware of the dangers that lay ahead. The frontier was unpredictable. Wild animals roamed freely, and rival groups sometimes traveled through the area. There were also the local lawmen, who might not understand the situation and could mistake the women for trespassers. Jack's mind was constantly alert, scanning the horizon, listening for sounds, and planning each movement. He knew that one mistake could put all of them at risk. Yet, he also knew that hesitation could be just as dangerous. Courage and careful judgment were both necessary. The women, despite their exhaustion, moved with remarkable coordination. They had clearly traveled together before, communicating with silent gestures and subtle glances. Jack observed how they worked as a team, supporting each other and sharing small tasks. When one faltered or showed signs of fatigue, another would gently guide her, offering encouragement without words. Jack felt a deep sense of respect for their resilience and resourcefulness. These were people who had survived long journeys, faced dangers beyond what most could imagine, and yet maintained dignity and composure throughout. Midday brought the harsh desert sun, and Jack knew they needed to rest. He guided the women to a small grove of trees near a creek, a rare oasis in the arid landscape. Here, they could drink, eat, and rest in relative safety. Jack shaded the supplies and helped the women settle down, ensuring that the horses were watered and fed. As they rested, he noticed the small ways in which they expressed gratitude, quiet smiles, gentle nods, and careful attention to the tasks at hand. Jack realized that trust was being built not only through action, but through these small gestures that showed mutual respect. While they rested, Jack encouraged the women to share more about their journey. Through broken words, gestures, and sketches, they told him about the hardships they had faced. They described nights spent hiding from danger, days of walking through scorching heat, and encounters with strangers who had not always been kind. Jack listened intently, absorbing every detail, trying to understand their world and the challenges they had endured. Each story reinforced his sense of responsibility. These women were survivors, and they were counting on him to guide them safely through unknown territory. After their brief rest, the group resumed travel. Jack led them through winding trails, teaching them to recognize signs of danger and to move quietly when necessary. The women followed closely, mimicking his movements and practicing the lessons he had taught them. Jack was impressed by their ability to adapt quickly. Despite fatigue, they remained vigilant, constantly scanning the landscape and responding to his signals. It was a dance of coordination, patience, and trust, one that would be crucial for the days to come. As the afternoon wore on, Jack noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon. A storm was approaching, and the desert, which seemed peaceful moments earlier, could become treacherous in minutes. He quickly guided the women to a small cave he had discovered during his travels, a natural shelter that offered protection from the elements. Inside, they huddled together, listening to the wind howl and rain pelt the rocks outside. The women, though exhausted, maintained calm composure, trusting Jack to lead them through the danger. Jack felt a sense of pride in their resilience and strength, knowing that courage often shone brightest in moments of uncertainty. During the storm, Jack and the women shared stories to pass the time. Using sketches and simple words, they exchanged experiences, laughter, and reflections. Jack learned more about their culture, the traditions, the songs, and the values that shaped their lives. He shared stories of life on the ranch, his own struggles and triumphs, and the lessons the desert had taught him. Though separated by language and culture, a deep connection was forming, one built on empathy, respect, and shared humanity. By the time the storm passed, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow across the desert. Jack led the women out of the cave and continued along the trail, mindful of the fading light. They moved carefully, knowing that night would bring additional challenges. Jack used the remaining daylight to point out landmarks and safe paths, ensuring that they would be prepared for the night ahead. The women followed closely, their trust in Jack evident in their steady movements and attentive eyes. As darkness settled over the desert, Jack guided the group to a small clearing where they could camp safely. He built a small fire, enough to provide warmth and light, but not so large as to attract attention. The women settled around it, grateful for the security and comfort it provided. Jack handed out blankets and shared the remaining food, careful to ration supplies for the journey ahead. That night, as they sat together under the vast sky filled with stars, a sense of quiet camaraderie filled the air. Despite the dangers they had faced, they had made progress, and the bond between them continued to grow stronger. Throughout the night, Jack kept watch while the women slept. He reflected on the day's journey, the lessons learned, and the challenges still ahead. He knew that the path to safety would not be easy. The frontier was full of uncertainty, and the journey was far from over. But he also knew that courage, preparation, and trust could overcome even the greatest obstacles. These women had already shown remarkable bravery, and he was determined to honor their trust by guiding them safely. As the first light of dawn touched the desert, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. The women stirred, ready to continue the journey. Though tired, they were determined, and Jack admired their unwavering spirit. Today would bring new challenges, but it would also bring new opportunities for connection, learning, and survival. He knew that together, they could face whatever lay ahead, and that the experiences they shared would forever change each of them. Jack Reynolds understood that this journey was more than just a physical passage through the desert. It was a journey of trust, courage, and discovery. He had come to respect the strength and resilience of the women, and he had learned to see the world through their eyes. Each step they took together strengthened their bond, built confidence, and prepared them for the challenges that lay ahead. By mid-morning, the group resumed travel, moving with careful coordination and quiet determination. Jack continued to teach them survival skills, emphasizing awareness, patience, and cooperation. The women followed closely, practicing the techniques he demonstrated and offering support to one another. Their trust in Jack had grown, and it was clear that they recognized his commitment to their safety. For Jack, this trust was both an honor and a responsibility, a promise to protect and guide them, no matter what challenges the frontier might present. As the day progressed, the desert landscape shifted from open plains to rocky outcrops and narrow canyons. Jack led the women carefully, teaching them how to navigate difficult terrain and avoid potential hazards. They moved slowly but steadily, their spirits bolstered by the progress they were making. Each successful step reinforced their confidence and strengthened the bond between them and Jack. It was a journey that demanded courage, resilience, and mutual respect, and all three elements were evident in every action, glance, and gesture. By late afternoon, the group reached a small stream where they could rest and replenish supplies. Jack allowed the women to wash and drink, while he carefully checked the horses and redistributed supplies for the next stage of the journey. They paused here for a while, taking in the beauty of the water sparkling in the sunlight and sharing quiet moments of reflection. The journey had been long and difficult, but each step had brought them closer to safety and closer to understanding one another. As the sun began to set, Jack guided the group to a safe campsite, hidden from view by rocks and brush. They built a modest fire enough to provide warmth and light, and settled in for the night. The women, exhausted but resilient, sat close together, sharing quiet conversation and comfort. Jack distributed food and blankets, ensuring that everyone was ready for the challenges ahead. That night, under a sky filled with stars, the bond between them grew stronger, forged by shared experience, trust, and mutual respect. The morning air was crisp, and a gentle breeze swept across the desert plains as Jack Reynolds and the 5 Apache women prepared to continue their journey. The previous days had strengthened their bond, and the women now trusted Jack more fully, though their eyes still held caution. Jack, for his part, felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. Each step they took brought them closer to safety, but also closer to danger. The frontier was unpredictable, and he knew that any wrong decision could have serious consequences. As they moved along a narrow canyon trail, Jack constantly scanned the horizon for signs of trouble. His experience as a cowboy had taught him to notice the smallest details: the way the wind moved through the brush, the tracks of animals in the dust, and the occasional glint of metal that might indicate other travelers. The women followed closely, their movements quiet and deliberate. They had learned to mimic his actions, pausing when he paused, moving silently when he moved silently. It was a delicate dance, each step requiring awareness, patience, and trust. By midday, the sun blazed overhead, making the desert heat intense. Jack led the group to a shaded area near a dry creek bed, where they could rest and drink from small pockets of water that had collected from a recent rainstorm. The women drank eagerly but carefully, conserving the water for the long journey ahead. Jack shared some of their rations, distributing dried meat and hardtack evenly. He noticed the women working together to ration their food, sharing quietly among themselves, and ensuring that no one went hungry. Their teamwork impressed him deeply, showing resilience and intelligence that matched their courage. As they rested, Jack began to consider the potential dangers ahead. He knew that other travelers, some friendly, some hostile, traveled through these parts. Bandits, rival settlers, and even unfriendly lawmen could pose threats. He had to plan their path carefully, choosing routes that avoided open plains where they could be seen, while still keeping them moving efficiently toward the distant settlement. The women listened intently as Jack outlined the next leg of the journey, using sketches and gestures to show the safest trails, water sources, and hidden places where they could rest. With the sun high in the sky, they continued their journey. The desert landscape gradually shifted from open plains to rugged hills and jagged rock formations. Moving through this terrain was difficult. The rocks were loose, the paths narrow, and the danger of a misstep was constant. Jack led the way, carefully testing the stability of each step and pointing out hazards to the women behind him. They followed with caution, their movements slow but deliberate. Every footfall mattered, and each successful step built their confidence and trust. Suddenly, Jack noticed faint tracks in the dust along the trail. He crouched, examining them closely. They were human tracks, fresh enough that whoever had passed through recently was still nearby. He signaled the women to stop, using gestures to communicate urgency without alerting anyone else. Their eyes widened slightly, but they remained still, waiting for Jack's guidance. He studied the tracks carefully, noting the size and number of prints. It was impossible to tell if the travelers were dangerous, but caution was essential. The women followed his lead, keeping silent and staying close to the rock walls for cover. Hours passed with careful, deliberate movement, and the sun began to dip toward the horizon. Jack decided to seek shelter for the night before continuing. He led them to a small canyon that offered both protection and concealment. Inside, they found a hidden alcove that would serve as a safe campsite. The women worked quickly to settle in, arranging blankets and supplies while Jack prepared a small, low fire. The fire provided warmth and light without attracting attention from outsiders. For the first time that day, the group was able to relax slightly, grateful for the temporary safety the canyon offered. While the women rested, Jack thought about the journey so far. Each day had tested their endurance, patience, and courage. He realized that the women were not only surviving, they were learning, adapting, and showing remarkable strength. They had endured fear, hunger, and exhaustion, yet they continued to move forward with determination. Jack felt a deep respect for them, recognizing that their resilience was as much a part of their journey as the land itself. That evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and purple, Jack began to outline the plan for the next day. He used sketches to show the trails they would take, the water sources they could rely on, and the areas they should avoid. The women studied the maps closely, asking questions through gestures and nods. They were attentive, quick learners, and eager to participate in planning the journey. Jack realized that this collaboration was essential. Their survival depended not only on his guidance, but also on their understanding and judgment. As night fell, the desert grew quiet except for the occasional howl of a distant coyote. Jack kept watch while the women slept, knowing that danger could appear at any moment. The wind rustled through the canyon, carrying the scent of dust and earth, and Jack listened carefully for any unusual sounds. He thought about the challenges they had faced and those that lay ahead. The journey was far from over, and the frontier offered no guarantees of safety. Yet he remained determined to protect the women, guided by a strong sense of duty and empathy. The following morning brought a new challenge. The path ahead led through a narrow ridge that offered little room to maneuver. Jack carefully tested each step before moving forward, showing the women how to navigate the treacherous terrain. They followed closely, relying on his experience and instructions. The ridge was both physically demanding and mentally taxing, requiring constant attention and coordination. Jack noticed the women's determination and resilience once again, impressed by their ability to remain focused despite the difficulty. Midday heat forced them to pause near a small grove of trees. Jack allowed the women to rest and drink, while he checked the horses and adjusted the packs. They worked together to share the supplies, ensuring that each person had enough food and water. Jack used this opportunity to teach the women how to recognize signs of danger in the landscape: broken branches, animal tracks, or unusual patterns in the terrain. He emphasized awareness and careful observation, knowing that these skills could make the difference between safety and peril. As the afternoon wore on, Jack noticed movement on a distant ridge. It was difficult to tell who it was, but caution demanded that he prepare for the possibility of confrontation. He signaled the women to hide behind rocks and remain silent. Together, they observed the figures at a distance, noting their behavior and direction. It was clear they were not traveling alone, and their intentions were unknown. Jack weighed his options carefully, deciding to take a longer, safer route that would avoid potential danger while still keeping the group on track. The women followed his lead without hesitation, demonstrating both trust and understanding. The day grew long, and the group finally found a secluded spot to camp for the night. Jack built a small fire, careful to keep it low and contained, and the women settled in around it. They shared a quiet meal, speaking in soft tones and gestures, exchanging small details about their journey and experiences. Jack observed them, recognizing the strength and courage that had carried them this far. The night was calm, with only the gentle sounds of the desert as a reminder of the world beyond their camp. Throughout the night, Jack stayed alert, watching for signs of danger while ensuring the women could rest. He reflected on the challenges they had faced and those that still lay ahead. Each step of the journey had tested their courage, patience, and resourcefulness. The women had proven themselves resilient, capable, and determined. Jack felt a deep sense of responsibility to guide them safely, understanding that their trust in him was both a gift and a duty. By dawn, Jack was ready to lead the group once again. The women awoke refreshed, ready to face another day on the trail. The journey had been difficult, but it had also strengthened their connection and trust. Jack knew that the path ahead would bring new challenges, but he was confident that with careful planning, courage, and mutual support, they could overcome whatever obstacles awaited them. The group set out, moving with careful coordination and awareness. Jack continued to teach the women about navigating the terrain, recognizing signs of danger, and using the environment to their advantage. Each lesson reinforced the skills they had already learned, building confidence and ensuring that they were prepared for whatever challenges the frontier might present. Together, they moved forward, aware that every step was both a test and an opportunity to survive, learn, and strengthen the bonds that had formed among them. The morning sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light across the desert plains. Jack Reynolds and the 5 Apache women had spent countless days traveling through rugged terrain, facing both the elements and the unknown dangers of the frontier. Each step of their journey had tested their endurance, patience, and courage. Now, the end of the journey was finally within reach, though Jack knew that the last stretch could be just as dangerous as the rest. Every decision mattered, and every movement required careful attention. The group moved quietly through the early morning light, following a hidden trail that Jack had chosen to avoid main paths where travelers might spot them. The women had grown confident in their steps, moving in coordination with Jack, observing the terrain and alert for any signs of danger. Their trust in him had grown steadily over the journey, and Jack, in turn, admired their resilience, strength, and determination. Though tired and worn, the women pressed forward, motivated by the hope of safety and a place where they could rebuild their lives. By midday, the sun blazed overhead, reflecting off the rocky outcrops that surrounded them. Jack led the group to a small natural spring he had known about from previous travels. The women drank eagerly, filling their water skins for the final leg of the journey. Jack distributed food, ensuring everyone had enough energy to continue. As they rested, he used the time to teach them one final set of survival techniques: how to move silently at night, how to find water in dry areas, and how to recognize safe places to camp that offered shelter from both animals and human threats. The women absorbed every lesson with careful attention, knowing that these skills might save their lives in the days to come. While they rested, Jack also spoke with the women about the settlement they were approaching. He explained what to expect, the people they might encounter, and the customs they should be aware of. The women listened intently, asking questions through gestures and broken words. Though their journey had been long and exhausting, they were focused and eager to reach their destination safely. Jack realized that their courage was matched by wisdom. They understood the risks of the world and moved forward with careful planning rather than fear. By mid-afternoon, they resumed travel. The terrain became more challenging, with steep slopes and narrow trails carved into the side of cliffs. Jack led the way, carefully testing each step and showing the women how to move safely. They followed closely, concentrating on their footing and mimicking Jack's movements. The journey demanded both physical strength and mental focus, and Jack could see how much the women had learned since their first day on his ranch. Each small success gave them confidence, reinforcing the trust and teamwork that had developed over the past days. Suddenly, from a ridge above, Jack noticed movement. A group of riders was approaching, their horses kicking up dust as they descended. Jack's heart beat faster. The travelers were unfamiliar and their intentions were unknown. He quickly signaled the women to take cover behind rocks and low shrubs. They crouched silently, their faces tense but composed, trusting Jack to guide them safely. Jack observed the riders closely, studying their approach and estimating their distance. He knew that any misstep could alert the riders to their presence, so he remained calm, moving only when necessary. The riders passed by the ridge without noticing the group. Jack signaled the women to remain still until the danger had fully passed. They waited in tense silence, listening to the sound of hooves fading into the distance. Relief washed over them, and Jack allowed a small, quiet smile to appear. It was a reminder that the frontier was full of unpredictable threats, but careful observation, patience, and trust could overcome even the most dangerous situations. The women relaxed slightly, though they remained vigilant, knowing that the journey was not yet over. By late afternoon, the group reached a hidden valley where they could camp safely. The valley was secluded, surrounded by cliffs and thick brush, offering protection from both the elements and prying eyes. Jack built a modest fire enough to provide warmth and light, and the women settled in around it. They shared food and water, speaking quietly through gestures and soft words, reflecting on the journey so far. The women's exhaustion was evident, but so was their satisfaction at having traveled this far. Jack watched them with pride, recognizing the courage and determination that had carried them through every challenge. As night fell, the sky filled with stars, and the desert became quiet and still. Jack kept watch while the women slept, thinking about the journey and the challenges that lay ahead. They were close to the settlement now, but he knew that the final approach could still hold unexpected difficulties. The women's trust in him had been earned through days of careful guidance, and Jack understood that this trust was a responsibility he could not take lightly. He reflected on the lessons they had learned together: patience, courage, awareness, and the importance of supporting one another through difficult times. The following morning, Jack led the group toward the settlement, a small community nestled along the edge of a river. The landscape changed as they approached. Green grass replaced dry desert, and clusters of trees and cultivated land signaled the presence of human habitation. The women's excitement was evident in their expressions, though they remained cautious. Jack reminded them to move quietly and avoid drawing unnecessary attention, explaining that the settlement was unfamiliar, and the people there might not be expecting strangers. As they drew closer, the women spotted familiar faces and structures in the distance. Farmers worked the land, children played near small homes, and the sounds of daily life carried on the breeze. Jack guided the women to the edge of the settlement, carefully observing their reactions. The women whispered among themselves, expressing relief and hope through gestures and soft words. For the first time in days, they allowed themselves to feel a sense of security, knowing that the danger that had haunted them was finally behind them. Jack approached the settlement leaders to explain the situation. He described the women's journey, the dangers they had faced, and the reasons they had sought refuge. The leaders listened attentively, impressed by both Jack's honesty and the courage of the women. After discussion, they welcomed the women into the community, offering food, shelter, and a chance to start anew. The women's relief was palpable, and they expressed gratitude to Jack with heartfelt gestures and smiles. For Jack, seeing their safe arrival was a profound moment, a reward for the courage, patience, and careful planning that had carried them through the journey. Over the next few days, Jack helped the women settle into the settlement. They found temporary homes, began learning local customs, and started to rebuild the routines that had been disrupted by their flight. Jack continued to provide guidance and support, sharing his knowledge of survival and navigating the land. The women adapted quickly, demonstrating the same resilience and intelligence that had carried them through the desert. Their courage and determination inspired not only Jack, but also the people of the settlement, who came to respect and admire them for their strength. During this time, Jack reflected on how much the journey had changed him. He had begun as a man accustomed to solitude, facing the frontier alone, and now he had become a guide, protector, and friend to these 5 remarkable women. He had learned the value of trust, the power of courage, and the importance of empathy in a world that often demanded toughness and resilience. The experience had strengthened his character and broadened his understanding of the human spirit. The women, in turn, also reflected on their journey. They had faced fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty, yet they had survived and thrived with the help of someone they had only just met. They had learned new skills, gained confidence, and discovered the strength of teamwork and mutual trust. Their lives had been changed not only by the journey itself, but by the compassion and courage of Jack Reynolds, a man who had risked his own safety to help them find refuge. As the weeks passed, the women began to integrate into the community fully. They shared stories of their journey, taught others lessons they had learned in the desert, and contributed to the settlement with their skills and knowledge. Jack continued to watch over them, proud of their progress and inspired by their resilience. The experience had left a lasting impact on everyone involved, creating bonds that would endure long after the journey had ended. In time, Jack returned to his ranch, the desert stretching before him once again. But he was no longer the same man who had discovered 5 frightened women hiding in his barn. He had witnessed courage, resilience, and the transformative power of trust. The journey had tested him, challenged him, and ultimately changed him in profound ways. He carried with him the memory of their faces, the lessons learned in the desert, and the quiet satisfaction of having made a difference in the lives of those who needed him most. Though the journey had ended, its lessons endured. Jack Reynolds had come to understand that courage was not just about facing danger alone. It was about standing with others, guiding them, and sharing in both the struggles and triumphs of life. The 5 Apache women had changed his life as much as he had changed theirs, leaving a story of bravery, trust, and hope that would remain with him forever.